They're like, we don't make fentanyl. They're right. They don't. They just give you all the ingredients for it and ship it to Mexico. And then what they did was to trick the world. They came out and said, hey, we're going to not sell precursor X. They're like, so now we're out of the fentanyl trade entirely. The problem is there's 14 other precursors you can use to make fentanyl, and they're still shipping all of those. So what we did when I got to the bureaus, we stood up this massive enterprise to go after fentanyl precursor companies in mainland China. And they're probably not going to like that. And what they're doing now to get cute is they're shipping that stuff not straight to here. They're going to places like India, and I'm also doing operations in India. And they're having the Mexican cartels now make this fentanyl down in Mexico still. But, instead of going right up the southern border and into America, you know what they're doing? They're flying it into Vancouver. They're taking the precursors up to Canada, manufacturing it up there, and doing their global distribution routes from up there because we were being so effective down south.
It's almost like Kash Patel knew who the guest for today's show was before he went on with Rogan to talk about the FBI's war on fentanyl. Let me share this clip with everybody before we get into today's show. I haven't yet gone through the entire thing. I've seen some clips of Kash Patel, who was just on Rogan or was on Rogan, and they just published the episode. And I'm going to listen to it with extreme interest as I go for my afternoon jog. I don't listen to stuff when I go for a bike ride because I need to pay attention to gators and bobcats. I'm going to listen to this because I saw some clips. We're going to maybe play one a little later with Royce Lopez, who posted a clip about Patel talking about the Epstein stuff, which is going to leave everybody with more questions than answers. But on the fentanyl stuff, I've gotten into it. It sounds like they're doing amazing stuff, big stuff. I listened to a little bit of what Patel said after that, and I'm not sure I agree with it, where Kash was talking about how China might be using the fentanyl crisis as biological warfare against America specifically. It seemed like Kash was either not aware of the fentanyl overdoses in Canada, which are wildly out of control, insofar as he's from an American-centric perspective, but didn't seem to have full awareness of how much death and destruction fentanyl is causing in Canada. He was under the impression, or said it's not so bad in Australia, the Five Eyes. I don't know about Australia. I'm going to ask our guest, Sam Cooper, but I know it's over the top in Canada. 600 plus people dying a month from opioid overdoses. Monthly, 80% of that is related to fentanyl. All that to say, Kash Patel describing what the problem is, what I've been saying for a while, because of the big brain of Sam Cooper, who I'm going to pick today. Canada has become a national security threat to these United States of America. For those of you who are dying to hear about what's going on with the Elon beef, going to get into it afterwards. But when Sam says he's available, Viva is going to make himself available. I'm not going to talk about myself in the third person. Sam is amazing. If you don't know him, he's a Canadian journalist covering China, fentanyl, drug trade, scandals in Canada. I still wonder how he's on the air. I don't want to jinx anything. Sam, I'm going to bring you in. You'll introduce yourself. Everybody, Sam Cooper, man of the hour. Sir, how goes the battle?
I'm great, Viva. It's always great to talk to you and be back today.
Dude, well, every time you're on, I get smarter. I hope other people get smarter, and I retain what you say because it's so flipping insane. For those who don't know, just give the 30,000-foot overview as to who you are.
I started as a journalist in Vancouver around 2008, and I literally grew up in the middle of what I now know is essentially a hybrid fentanyl war. And so your opener, Kash Patel, I'm told that he's aware of my work. Let's put it this way. I think I'm aware of the people he talks to in U.S. intelligence. But I cut my teeth on just the devastation in Vancouver. So thousands started dying per year around 2014 when that fentanyl from China really started flowing in. And as Kash said, as soon as, Trump and Biden started to crack down on China and say, hey, you got to stop that. They decentralized their production even more, sending literally factory pieces, pill presses, dyes, fentanyl labs across the Vancouver area and in Mexico. It wasn't known, everyone knew that Mexico was hardcore narco territory, but I grew up as a reporter in the city where Vancouver was being taken over by Asian organized crime. And, I started to make such impact that around 2017, 2018, people in the US government reached out to me and they literally said, we need to have coffee. I suppose, yeah, if you want to say they're linked to the State Department or CIA, that should be about right. And they're saying, you're damn right. China is getting a footprint we're concerned about in the real estate, in the organized crime, in the political influence, and in the narcotics activity in Vancouver. And so, really, my career has been, finding out how sophisticated organized crime runs through the corruption, runs through banks, runs through law offices. And in a nutshell, China is surrounding Fortress North America, and America is the target at the end of the day.
So, explain this. Well, first of all, let's just go all the way to the back. And first of all, I'll just say you're wearing the Bureau hat. The Bureau.news is your website. I'm going to pull up, the article that you just wrote on the cartel and how they're using Indigenous land, native land, Indian land reservations up in Canada for the drug manufacturing. When did the fentanyl crisis start? Because it's like a relatively new word, like new-ish, 5 to 8 years. But when did the fentanyl trade start in North America or start killing people in large swaths in North America?
It really starts around 2013, 2014. This is when, from my perspective, when it takes off in Vancouver, and that's when Chinese transnational organized crime, working hand in hand with the Chinese Communist Party, realizes that they can amplify the heroin trade that they've controlled for decades. And they had been running the heroin into Mexico, into Vancouver, into American cities in complex ways. And they start to run the illicit fentanyl, counterfeit OxyContin pills. And so the crisis was already rolling, among the working class in America with West Virginia, these states where people got addicted to, the real pharmaceutical opioids, and then international organized crime. So the cartels, supplied at the highest level by China, got into that trade and they start to run it in through labs. So in Vancouver, again, where I grew up, as a reporter covering this on the street level and up to the bank level and the political level, 2014 is that year. I'm going to get visual here, where the exponential death chart starts to go like this. And I think how I made my name is I wrote a book called Willful Blindness, matching that death curve with the Vancouver real estate prices. They were marching in lockstep. So it's money laundering through Canadian cities that abets this. And Vancouver is death zone. It's literally third world conditions. If people travel up there, they'll visually see it. But now this is spreading to Canadian cities, and I know it's happening in the United States as well.
This is from the Telegraph. I think the last time I pulled up an article that referred to Vancouver as the fentanyl capital is from The Guardian. But I remember East Hastings back in 2001, 2002, when I went there, it was insane back then, and I understand it's only gotten exponentially worse. If you can explain this, I'm not sure if it's easy to explain. The death from overdoses starts to spike with fentanyl in particular. There's always been a drug trade problem, but the ODs from heroin and other illicit drugs didn't match the same death rate from fentanyl because of its toxicity. What accounts for the shift in the nature of the illicit drugs from like a standard heroin or other drugs to the fentanyl and its toxicity?
Well, it's really about, first, to answer your question, fentanyl is 40 times more potent than heroin. So Vancouver, Skid Row, East Hastings had a heroin problem from the 90s. As I did, document in my book, this is when Chinese organized crime moves in a big way in the late 80s into Vancouver and Toronto. And so there's a major heroin problem. And it's known around the world in Vancouver. But in 2014, this is the exact year when fentanyl really starts to be introduced both into the heroin supply and into simply pills. The price goes down. But what I want to stress is Chinese organized crime had already been, running methamphetamine ecstasy through Vancouver as a hub, just the same as they are working with the Mexican cartels in Mexico to run synthetic opioids through. So you know the series The Narcos is all about cocaine from Colombia, Pablo Escobar, and how the Mexican cartels take that over. There's 2 series about that, you know, that progression. What I'm documenting is how Chinese Communist Party is now the 3rd wave and the more powerful wave, injecting synthetics into uppers, methamphetamine, and downers, the opioids. And that is the war. That's the drug war we're experiencing right now. And it's strategic on China's part. I know that's cutting edge, but it's starting to be understood, I think, more widely, of course, in the US government, and I hope in the population.
Well, I mean, that's part and parcel of the question. It's like, you know, when the Escobars are into the drug trade, they don't want to kill their clients. They want to give them a drug, get them addicted, but not kill them. It's better for business to be cynical. The what I don't understand is fentanyl almost seems designed to kill. And if that's the case, it seems like a bad business model if it's intended to be a business model, but a good political geostrategic model if it's intended to be something else. Do you have any sort of insights into the intention behind China's involvement in the fentanyl crisis? Because from what I understand, it's not lucrative, unless I'm wrong on that.
Well, I mean, the fentanyl itself can just amplify the amount. Of course, it's so powerful that you visualize this. You toss a few specks of this into the vat that you're mixing up heroin in, and you can just amplify the amount of heroin that you're dealing. The same thing, you can, as they say, you know, step on or cut up cocaine. I believe it's being laced even into cannabis. You can just get wild with any amount of drugs to make them more powerful. So it is profitable to China, who's producing those precursors. This is a big part of their GDP. But to the point of the hybrid drug warfare, yeah, I think to take a step back a little bit, a lot of people are saying, you know, President Trump, Cash Patel, this is all disinformation. They just want to, you know, slam Mexico, Canada, China. No, my data point is this. President Biden's Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, went up to Canada, Vancouver, in 2023 and talked to a mayor that was the only voice getting tough on the fentanyl crisis in British Columbia. And he said, Mayor Brad West, I'm glad. Can we work together? Canada is a big part of the problem. Canada lacks organized crime laws. And Brad West shared with me, as I've written on the Bureau, Antony Blinken told him, the US government at a high level knows the Chinese Communist Party is working with the cartels, and there's a shared objective there. The objective of the cartels, of course, is power and profit. The Chinese Communist Party, power, profit, and destruction of social systems in North America. That is, I asked Brad West, you're telling me that a senior US official said China wants North Americans to suffer from fentanyl. Brad West shook his head yes. So, yeah, this is coming from the highest levels of US intelligence and government. This is intentional on China's part. If you think about it, yeah, we're getting very close to war, as the head of the Pentagon said last week, I believe. You know, China's designs on Taiwan could be imminent. They're already deep in American critical infrastructure in war planning for that event. And, you know, the capacity here is they want to suck our healthcare away, dollars away. They want police to be, you know, overspent. They want to see people dying. They want to see people in hospitals. They want to see social cohesion being pulled apart. So I do think, I believe an American government, the high levels say this is strategic on Beijing's part.
I'm laughing only because it's like a black pill laugh. Because whenever I talk with you, I get an impending sense of doom. That's even more extreme than normal. Let me ask you this: we see the image. This is, in fact, not an exaggerated display of what would be a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl, like that amount of substance.
A speck, literally a speck of this stuff, you know, that goes into what they call a hot pill, or you know, a pill that has too much of it in it can kill. And Viva, I'll take the moment. I know that when we talked before, I told you about that Danforth shooting case, and you know, and how there were indications it could be linked to ISIS and terrorism. Since talking to you, I've further confirmed from a senior DEA source that reached out to me and said, oh yeah, the American government found some concerning links in Pakistan to the family where 40 kilograms of carfentanil was seized in Toronto. And two things going on here. The Canadian government didn't want to work with the DEA. They didn't want to share a sample of that carfentanil. And the American government was left wondering, is there a serious terror link to that? What could be a bioweapon?
Yeah, let me refresh everybody's memory for those who don't know, who are not Canadian. Mass shooting occurred on Danforth Avenue. It was some guy whose name I didn't even really piece together until afterwards, shot up a place, but his name was Faisal Hussein, killed 2 people, wounded 13 others, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I believe if I go carfentanil, was it his brother that was found in a coma?
His brother in a suburban home just outside Toronto got overdosed with carfentanil simply from handling those materials in the lab. And to go a little bit further, color on that story, my senior DEA source said they found in the lab, local police that were a little bit cooperative found, colorful food dye, leading the DEA to believe this could have been marketed, to give out to young people, youth. And so there was still the concern in the American government that this could be a weapon of mass destruction. And I'll add this. For people that saying, the argument that there's only data showing a small amount of fentanyl seizures at the northern border, people say President Trump is making this up. No, the DEA knew that they already had a case from Quebec where carfentanil was shipped in the mail to Atlanta, Georgia. And this is why they wanted a little bit of that seizure in Toronto to see if it matched up, and the Canadian government wouldn't work with them.
People need to understand this was another one of the black pills that you exposed, that we were all under the impression this was just a mass shooting of a guy named Faisal Hussein. I think that was his name. His brother was found in a coma with multiple kilograms of carfentanil. And let me bring up the article here, because I don't think people know this. While Fahad was in a coma, fire crew responded to a carbon monoxide alarm at the Pickering home, alerted police of suspicious substance in the basement. They executed a warrant, found 33 guns, other prohibited devices, overcapacity magazines, and seized 53 kilograms of a substance identified as the deadly street drug carfentanil. So what we thought might have been a lone mass shooting then leads to a family of crime. Then you say, okay, it's just 2 guys, forget their origins and forget those demographics, who might just be involved in crime. But 53 kilograms of carfentanil, and the accusation was that the suspicion is that one brother who just partook in a mass shooting, his other brother might have been planning on using the 53 kilograms of carfentanil. I don't know how many people that can kill, but cloaking it in a way to kill mass amounts of people through drugs that might look like candies, like what Kash Patel was describing in the podcast.
This is what the U.S. government and the DA feared. They didn't confirm that, but being good investigators, they feared that. And furthermore, ISIS came out after the brother did the shooting and said, this is a soldier of the Islamic State. And this story just, you talk about black pill, this was just whitewashed. And, the Toronto police chief, Justin Trudeau's public safety minister, came out and said, no national security links here, no potential terror links. And as I reported, the DEA wasn't convinced by that line from Canada. And, they, to this day, I believe they're concerned that there absolutely could be direct or indirect, let's say, threat networks in Pakistan related to those drugs, related to that shooting. And Viva, as you know, look, in the years since, when the Canadian media just went silent on this, there's been a number of ISIS cases popping up in the Toronto area, right? So you start to wonder, has the Canadian government been on top of that? And I'm afraid they haven't.
It's even worse, Sam. It might not be good for my health to talk to you, but it might be good for my knowledge. I'm just going back and pulling up an article from 2018, USA Today. Islamic State claims Toronto shooting. Rampage, police not convinced. And then we can go on here. Islamic State claimed responsibility Wednesday for the gunman's rampage in Toronto that killed 2 people and wounded 13. But police chief Mark Saunders said there was no evidence to support the declaration. Life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. So that was very likely. We'll tie it all together with the drug trade. That was very likely an act of mass terrorism or mass casualty event that the two brothers involved with the Islamic State and massive drug production and distribution were trying to kill many people, and the Canadian government swept it under the rug, despite the American government acute interest in it.
With regards to the Carfentyl, I don't know whether this is strictly profit, whether this is profit and holding something that could be weaponized at a later date. But what I can tell you is DEA at the highest levels had those concerns. And furthermore, they, with their deep, military intelligence level capacity, confirmed what I was told, a concerning link in Pakistan. And let's just step back from that. They wanted cooperation from the Canadian government to look deeper. And meanwhile, we have senior Canadian officials saying, no, no terror, nothing to see here. And Viva, I'll tell you, after I broke this story, I got a message from an extremely trusted intelligence source that has always been accurate, that knows what's going on in Toronto, told me, yes, there was an ISIS link to the shooter, and Canada's government just didn't want to pursue it. So, I'm a journalist. I need to have two sources to break a huge story. But what I have there is a Canadian source saying the US government source suspicions and concerns were accurate.
Holy hell. Okay. Oh my goodness. And it all plays into the fact that there could only be a couple of reasons why the Canadian government would not be interested in it, why the Canadian authorities either have a stand down order or are actively not looking into it. I guess it's going to dovetail into the manufacturing of fentanyl in Canada now. Your latest article, let me bring this up just so people can read the headline. I'm going to give it to them afterwards, is how the cartel is expanding operations into Canada using Indigenous reserves as factory hubs. And this brings us back to what Kash Patel was talking about. I'll share this link with everybody, but tell us what the hell's going on to make us even more despaired about the state of affairs.
Yeah, I don't want to despair and gloom everyone. I don't think there's a silver lining here, except that my work is pushing for public policy changes, and these stories are hella interesting to read. So let's tell people that they got to dig into these stories. I can only share a little bit of the detail, but look. The Six Nations. So these are, the Indigenous peoples, great Indigenous peoples who were there before, Canada and the United States sort of split up into North and South there along the 51st parallel. These nations on the New York, Ontario, Quebec border have their own jurisdictions, really. It crosses, those two states. In that jurisdictional zone where there's a lot of First Nations, self-governance, Mexican cartels, actually 170 known crime groups are set up on those lands. Why does that matter? Well, you can guess. 170 crime groups taking advantage of the First Nations people who are, one, at times a population that can be exploited for drug use. Two, will not always have the capacity to police the dangers around them. Three, they're, the nefarious ones within those groups working with 170 crime groups to enrich themselves under the shield of this First Nations governance. So that means weapons trafficking, illegal tobacco plants of massive quantities being used by Chinese triads, Mexican cartels, using those lands as a shield. And so I broke the story that I could confirm a massive Ontario police anti-organized crime unit bust on one of these Six Nation reserves between Buffalo, New York, and Hamilton, Ontario, cracked down on a major illegal tobacco plant. And, concurrently, there was a fentanyl bust. The focus here wasn't fentanyl, but my story unpacked or connected the dots between Mexican cartels being at the top of the food chain, working with the Hells Angels on the reserve and many crime groups, and, being behind that tobacco plant. and my sources indicate using similarly these lands, and not just in Ontario and Quebec, but across Canada, using First Nation lands for the trafficking of narcotics, including fentanyl, weapons trafficking. And so that really fits into what Cash Patel says about Mexican cartels using Canada increasingly. It's Western Canada, it's Eastern Canada, it's Northern Canada, both Chinese Communist Party agents, remember, this is what Cash Patel said, and Mexican cartels are set up in the weak spots. And First Nations lands are one of those big weak spots for North America right now.
Now, I don't know if you've ever delved into it or written about it. We talk about the Indigenous missing women's crisis in Canada, described also as a genocide that they tried to pin on white Europeans. Do you know if there's any connection between the outrageous amount of, or disproportionate amount of Indigenous women that go missing or get involved in very bad stuff and the drug trade?
Well, I covered this in Vancouver deeply at the same time I was covering heroin, fentanyl, real estate corruption and money laundering, politics. And I think they all roll together at the end of the day. The story in Vancouver was that the worst of the worst, I would say mostly what I know to be domestic biker gang types, were, of course, exploiting a lot of people coming off First Nation reserves, drawn down into that free market drug zone in Vancouver, addicted on the hardest of drugs, heroin. It became fentanyl, and, turned into essentially, we could say, drug slaves, prostitution. And that is the major factor, driving the deaths of mostly indigenous women. An absolute, tragedy is drug addiction and exploitation, I say. So are the cartels directly behind that? In my experience, probably the Hells Angels, were the ones that were peripherally surrounding, what's called the Willie Picton massacre, where an egregious case where something like dozens of remains were found on a pig farm outside of Vancouver. And, in the same type of area where you would find labs or super labs now, which is out in the Fraser Valley and further afield from Vancouver.
It's so terrible. The Fraser Valley is so bloody beautiful. And the idea that like there are fentanyl super labs, which make, which destroy the small towns around it, I presume. Question from our locals community from Encryptus, who's in the backdrop. What about the fact that fentanyl can be a weapon for mass destruction? When in powder form and in the air, a single gram can kill hundreds of thousands. The quantity that is now available in a large quantity dropped from a drone could kill millions. Could that be the end game here? First, is that accurate, or is that sufficiently accurate to say?
I don't have the data on, airborne threats, how this could work, but stepping back, I do think that, look, I know because I hear it from officials that in sophisticated ways, fentanyl has been used to harm our populations in North America, to weaken the greatest free world power, the United States, which is on a collision course with China. This is happening. There are books called Unrestricted Warfare, or a book by Chinese generals where drug warfare is explained. So at this point, could carfentanil be a piece of that? Well, look at the agro-terrorism story, potential, what did they call it?
Agro-terrorism, with fungal agro-terrorism coming from China, coming from scientists who are doing research and apparently smuggling in the tools of their research to a Michigan university.
Look at that. I compared that to the Winnipeg Labs story. I think we've talked about how some Chinese scientists used Canada to work on a bioweapon. So is fentanyl part of that? And does China have scientists ready to turn up the volume on opioids and either through dealing or straight weaponization use it? I don't have a document that says that, but I believe that's probably true.
Just doing a quick search. Oh yeah, Encryptus, what's up?
I can give you the data. So it's 0.011 micrograms per cubic meter of air is the lethal dose when aerosolized.
Yeah,
That
and
is-
apparently the challenges are putting it into an aerosolized form that makes it inhalable. Though, historical context, it seems that in the 2002 Moscow theater hostage crisis, Russian forces used aerosolized fentanyl derivative, likely carfentanil or remifentanil, to incapacitate the terrorists. I did not know that.
Good point. Thanks
Holy
for taking
crap.
that up in the back channel. So let's think this through. China, together with Iranian threat networks, which is what Kash Patel said, with Mexican cartels, what if they have a decentralized stockpile of, fentanyl and carfentanil sitting in various areas in North America? And what if Beijing goes kinetic against Taiwan and, these stockpiles are ready to be used? We would, I think, if anyone that reads, the military theory and strategy would have to think that type of thing could be a threat. Look, again, the Winnipeg lab story, they they worked on weaponizing Ebola, between Winnipeg and Wuhan, a story that has yet to be fully known and told. The agro-terror story, we have to believe that there are multiple threats, and fentanyl and carfentanil are part of that threat stream, I believe.
Outrageous. I'm looking at it. Says Encryptus is right. In enclosed spaces, it can be used as a WMD. And does it have to be sprinkled over farmlands? It could be used at theaters or whatever. Holy crap. I never thought about that. Thanks. Between you now and Encryptus in the back, it's Black Pill Friday. Oh, man. Okay, so also flesh this out for us. Precursors. Now, so there is medicinal, there's pharmaceutical purpose for some of these chemicals. What, I don't know if you know the precursors by name, but what are these upwards of 14, 15 types of precursors that China gets away with shipping the precursors? And then I want to get into the pill crusher things, but what are these precursors?
Yeah, I mean, again, from a military perspective, they call it dual use technology. So, the chemicals are the building blocks of life. So the precursors and the building block of industry, the precursors are simply, I can't end blah, blah, blah. But there's, these are the building blocks in highly sophisticated labs of fentanyl. And, as I understand it, scientists can just tweak a few molecules, so to speak, much like they can tweak a few molecules in a Wuhan lab on something else, and it'll change the designation of the precursor. So if you're the US government saying, okay, we're going to sanction or designate the use of this precursor, if it comes from you, China, we're going to be, we'll take action. All China has to do, as Kash Patel said, is, monkey around with it, and it's a new precursor that isn't on that designated list. So that's what's going on. And as the pressure from the US government increased on China, that leads to the decentralizing, you no longer have whole pills being shipped in the mail from China. You have labs offshore where these precursors are then shipped, and the precursors are juggled around to stay, one step ahead of sanctions. And that's the story here. Decentralized, we could call it profit and weaponization.
What would be the practical legislative or law enforcement solution to it? Because I would have just presumed you would need a medical, I don't know, trade license, whatever it would be. It would be regulated, any chemical. So it sounds like they tweak it a little bit, so it's no longer one of the 15 that's on the list, and it's some other chemical that they can now ship internationally without registering regulation, and that's how it works. And then they keep playing this cat and mouse game, and then ship the precursors to a native reserve in Canada where they put it together and then ship it out for international distribution.
I mean, there's two ways. There's a lot of ways to look at it, but quite honestly, Viva, I've come to the point of view, both myself, that has been confirmed now that I have access to talking to senior intelligence officials, that the Chinese Communist Party, no matter what you negotiate with them on the surface, they don't intend to change their global economy, which, get this, talk about another black pill. I'm writing stories where senior US experts say China knowingly collects drug cash around the world from the worst of criminals, including their own homegrown criminals. and uses that drug cash to feed into economic projects, to feed into corruption wherever they collect that drug cash for, whether it's, Mexican cartels, Latin, Italian organized crime, the Hells Angels. So they are laundering the money around the world. They're upstream on producing the narcotics now, and they weave it into their trade. So what's the answer? I believe this is where the trade war comes in. You stop trading with them. You cut them off, right? Simply you rejig supply lines. And this is where Donald Trump and the US government, I believe for 10 years, have been strategically moving in that direction. But President Trump just doing it in his unique wrecking ball way, whenever he comes to power.
It's a political end goal of China. They have, and I'm reading the chat, people are saying China has infiltrated Canada a long time ago. Is there, what's the level now? We don't know who the MPs were that were infiltrated by China. Do we know what came of the Chinese MP from the Liberals who jokingly suggested the delivery of a conservative MP to I forget where, to some
Yeah.
Geez, where was it? It was to an embassy.
To the Toronto Consul General. So I'm glad you asked. That's an ongoing epic story. The story in a nutshell is Toronto Liberal MP speaking to Chinese press says it would be a real problem for Canadian relations with China if his rival in the Conservative Party is elected to Canadian Parliament, because this rival, Joseph Tay, a Hong Kong immigrant, faces a trumped up national security charge in Hong Kong simply for doing what you're doing, Viva, and speaking about what's on his mind. He's a former broadcaster, or he is still a broadcaster. For that, he had a $1 million Hong Kong bounty on his head. This Liberal MP not only said it's a problem if he gets elected, which was the exact same message we later learned was coming from Chinese propaganda intelligence. He also said to these journalists, so you could turn him over to the Toronto consulate to claim that reward. So what happens? Mark Carney, the running then for prime minister, was asked, would he kick out this MP? He didn't. My reporting and some others led finally to the RCMP saying they're investigating. That MP had to sit down. Another one replaced him, who also had, it was revealed, many connections to the Toronto consulate. And to jump to the chase, Joseph Tay, as I reported, followed by the New York Times, was told by our RCMP it was too dangerous for him to go out and knock on doors in his riding in sort of the Toronto area. So he did very well. He only lost by a few thousand votes. Very clear interference. After he lost, Hong Kong officials detained his relatives in Hong Kong to question him. So they're continuing the barrage on this man in Canada's parliament indirectly. And I'll add this, Viva, I have reviewed evidence that raises the concern that one of Joe Tay's campaign teams may have been stalked by a Chinese individual that is suspicious. So it all points to, your question, I think at the start, was how deep is the infiltration in Canada? Look, that case, many cases I've covered, and what I hear from US officials is Canada is CCP command central in the Western Hemisphere. That's the reality.
Someone can clip that, post it, tag Cash Patel on the Twitterverse. Holy hell. Wow. Okay. What else other than that, Mr. Cooper? How is the show? What else is going on right now in Canada? You have they're talking about strengthening the border. At least Carney's now talking about this after having got elected, implicitly acknowledging the very problem. Do they have the means? Do they have the finances? Do they have the staff, the personnel to even enforce the law at the Canadian border, or are they as understaffed as the military seems to be?
Yeah, my big takeaway on that, the Liberals have introduced a bill to make it look like they're going to get tough at the border. I haven't read it line by line, but I have, advocated as an expert now for years that Canada needs an anti-racketeering law, which it lacks. Canada needs to use that terror designation, which is new against cartels, and the Chinese Communist Party operatives and Iranian threat actors that they work with above them, and go after these people using Canadian reserves, using Canadian labs, using Canadian banks, using Canadian real estate. Canada needs to go after them with a terror designation hammer. Canada needs to use our military on Canadian soil. So the Liberals introduced a bill that doesn't do any of that. And, you know, I could go on, but buried in that bill is a potential poison pill that some have said in our parliament, giving, you know, Canadian police and intelligence powers to ask for anyone's sort of IP addresses and basically to go into everyone's internet life. So that just raises the concerns of what is the Liberal Party up to burying that in a bill? Is that needed to protect Canada's borders? And I'll end, this is another, I mean, this is what covering the news in Canada is like. Canada's new public safety minister, one of my former Global News colleagues revealed today, has to step down from any national security decisions related to the Tamil community because he is from the Tamil community in Toronto, and his father was involved in politics in, you know, abroad that I believe related to sort of terror networks. So
you got to weigh your words. So I won't call him. I'm pulling up an article as we talk about this. Tamil, a potential Tamil Tiger connected individual, which is a designated terrorist group, from what I understand. He's the minister of, he's the safety minister.
Well, I would not say at all that he's potentially connected, but he represented as a lawyer before going into politics a group, let's just say, involved in Tamil diaspora politics. His father evidently, reportedly, had some concerning linkages. And so stepping back, let's say what it is. He has had to recuse himself from certain decisions on Canadian public safety because of the community he comes from, which in my view just speaks to what is going on in Canada in many ways.
It's amazing. The article from the Global News is not coming up, but talking about potential conflict of interest leading to recusal. Holy crap. Okay. What is it? I don't even know where else to go from here. You let me see if there's any specific questions in the chat. Our sergeant says, I was just thinking, what if we used fentanyl for lethal injections, death penalty? Keep you hearing about the drug cocktail they give them, not working and people dying in agony. Let's not worry about that yet. So what are you working on these? Like, what are you working on now, and where are you heading with your research?
What I'm working on, I just actually put out what I would call a historical investigative deep dive story today. Again, an incredible, a guy they called the Mexican Chinese whale. This is like the footprint of synthetic narcotics in Mexico. There was a major factory run from 2003 by this high-level guy from China who becomes a Mexican citizen. And he was caught with $207 million in his Mexico City mansion. He was working with the Sinaloa cartel, laundered $125 million in Las Vegas casinos for the cartels. And the level of methamphetamine back in that day that he was dealing was in the dozens of tons, 700 million US dollars worth of methamphetamine. And as you know, methamphetamine about just as bad as fentanyl. And so a Chinese state-linked factory was involved in setting up a factory in Mexico, you know, and my sources indicate, even though this guy's in jail now, it could be still being used for fentanyl and other things. So it's just, I'm looking this summer at the complexity of exactly what Kash Patel says. When the US government cracks down on labs and networks in the United States, they go to Mexico. When they crack down in Mexico, they go to Canada. And at the end of the day, as I said at the start, this is China using the worst in the world to surround the United States. And let's call it Fortress North America, because I want to keep Canada and the United States strong together, no matter what government we have in Ottawa.
What is anybody doing in Canada about it? I mean, I don't want to despair you. You're doing the legwork that nobody's doing. You're exposing criminality and corruption of the highest order. and the Canadian government is hurrying up and doing nothing. Do they talk to you? Do you know if they have any plans to address any of this, or do they not even acknowledge your existence?
They now acknowledge my existence. Justin Trudeau's administration, after I started, breaking stories about how Chinese election interference, impacted our elections and deeply infiltrated his own party. I think they stopped responding to my questions. But Mark Carney's government, I can say, let's call this a little positive development. They're answering my questions and responding to my reporting. Does that mean that they're taking the measures needed to protect Canada's sovereignty and to be a good partner with the United States around the world? I don't. I'm skeptical of that. But look, at the end of the day, let's go to the weekend with a shred of positive energy. I do think. Look, on one hand, Mark Carney, I've got big concerns that he is. He could be vulnerable to the same Chinese networks that I would say captured Justin Trudeau. But Mark Carney is a heck of a lot smarter than Justin Trudeau. So I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm trying to be a little bit positive here.
Yeah, I always say intelligence without a moral compass is a weapon, not an asset. And I, until proof to the contrary, believe that Carney is more intelligent without a moral compass, or at least with a political agenda. And his agenda seems to be in line with China's agenda in terms of the type of government they want to run. Since the election, has Canada gotten, I mean, what's life like up there now that you have your Liberal government and potential budget being tabled, but your Liberal government?
Yeah, Viva, honestly, for the past 2 weeks, I've just been absorbing the reality and even writing the reality that our whole election, as you know, was it seems the biggest gaslighting campaign in Canadian history. It turned on whether, big bad President Donald Trump wanted to take the Canadian Arctic. And I wrote a story timelining how the Liberals, an extremely successful, one of the most successful political parties in Western democratic history, I believe, cleverly used Trump's Mar-a-Lago comment where, as you know, he said, well, if you can't pay for a military, maybe you should become the 51st state. And look, the Liberals were all ready to planning to run against, Donald Trump, essentially, even if he wasn't elected a second time. He surprised them, and then they found, okay, yeah, we are running against Donald Trump, and we're going to make the election about this psyop that United States wants to march on Canada.
We'll end it with this. It's a historical question, Sam, and a lot of people have floated the idea, as have I, that this is China's revenge for the Opium War. This is R. Sargent said, I've long said that we are balls deep in an opium war with the Chinese. I think America should take Canada, just stop the drug production coming from the north. I mean, some do hypothesize that this, China's got a long memory, and this is revenge against not just the Brits, but the West for the opium wars. What's your take? This is, whether or not it's a revenge for the opium wars, is this just China's conquest and a way of, in the long run and on the long game, weakening their enemies militarily, financially, economically, and socially?
Yeah, the short answer is I was skeptical for a long time that this could all be, partly intentionality of weakening and killing the West with drugs. But China, in its own way, in its history, suffered from colonial powers doing that. And so, yeah, it is. They learned, they said it was done to us. This is revenge, and very effective revenge. We can be successful. Remember, Sun Tzu says, the war fought without firing a bullet is the better war, right? So this is not my extrapolation or theory. I talk to smart people on my own podcast, including a former US government official that is a sinologist that says, yeah, you can find documents where Chinese senior officials are talking about the revenge theory or the counter opium war, the reverse opium war.
What is it now? I'm giving your link out here. What is your podcast, and where can people find you, Sam? And you got to come back on periodically just to slap whatever optimism I had in my stupid head out of it. But what's your podcast, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so it's called The Bureau Podcast. Again, not the Bureau to be confused with the FBI. It's just my brand right here. So you can go, thebureau.news is my investigative website. I got to thank everyone. It's 2 years now since I went independent, now up over 30,000 subscribers. I'd like to convert more of them to paying so I can pay some of my legal bills and etc. But yeah, go to thebureau.news. You'll find the podcast and you'll find slamming stories, probably about 4 or 5 per week.
Amazing. And I don't know what you remind me of Dexter a little bit, like Michael C. Hall, but back in the day. But it's because you're not wearing your glasses this time, so you look a little different.
On various days, I've got, anything from Matt Damon to Mark Wahlberg to Dexter. People called me, a killer from a TV series. And look, man, maybe I am a bit of a sniper in a way.
Sam, you do amazing work. I encourage and implore everybody to go support you in whatever way they can. You'll come back on and we'll do some updates as there's updates to discuss.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.